Today we will talk about reducing project duration. This chapter focuses on strategies for reducing project duration, both before setting the project baseline and during project execution. The choice of options depends on the constraints specific to the project. The project priority matrix, introduced in Chapter 4, plays a role in determining the appropriate strategies. For instance, if you are not resource constrained, there are typically more options available for reducing project time compared to situations where you cannot exceed the original budget. The chapter explores the reasons for reducing project duration and discusses various options for accelerating project completion. The chapter also concludes with a classic time cost framework used to determine which activities to crash. In project management, crashing refers to shortening the duration of an activity or the entire project beyond its normal completion time. The framework helps in making decisions about which activities to prioritize and invest additional resources in order to expedite project completion. Rationale for reducing project duration. Why we need to reduce project duration. Reducing project duration has become increasingly important due to various factors in today's business landscape. One significant reason is the need for a time-to-market advantage. With intense global competition and rapid technological advancements, companies must act swiftly to identify new opportunities, assemble project teams, and bring innovative products or services to market. Speed has become a crucial competitive advantage, particularly in high-tech industries where delays can result in significant market share loss. Therefore, companies often prioritize reducing project duration to ensure they stay ahead in the market. Another reason for accelerating project completion is the requirement for adaptability and survival. Businesses face challenges such as global recessions and energy crises, which demand quick responses and the ability to adapt. Rapid project management enables companies to address these challenges promptly and implement necessary changes to remain competitive. For instance, industries like the automotive sector need to shift their focus rapidly towards developing fuel-efficient and alternative transportation solutions to meet changing market demands. Unforeseen delays during a project can also necessitate reducing project time. Factors like adverse weather conditions, design flaws, or equipment breakdowns can cause significant disruptions. To get back on schedule, project managers often employ strategies to compress the remaining critical activities, thus minimizing the overall delay. Incentive contracts are another motivator for accelerating project completion. Contractors and owners may agree on contracts that offer rewards or incentives for early completion. This arrangement benefits both parties, as the contractor receives financial compensation while the owner gains access to the project's benefits sooner. Imposed deadlines, often arising from external pressures or public statements, can also drive the need to reduce project duration. However, it's important to consider the feasibility and cost implications associated with such deadlines. Rushing projects without proper planning may lead to higher costs and potential compromises in quality. Additionally, projects with high overhead costs may require careful evaluation. When the cost of housing and supporting a project team in remote locations is significant, project managers need to weigh the direct costs of shortening critical activities against potential savings in overhead expenses. Lastly, the reassignment of key resources, including equipment and personnel, can prompt the need for project compression. When resources are required for other projects, Project managers evaluate the cost of reducing project duration against the opportunity costs of retaining those resources. Okay, now what options we have for accelerating project completion? Two options. When managers need to shorten specific project activities and resources are not constrained, they have several effective methods at their disposal. 1. Adding resources. The most common approach is to assign additional staff and equipment to the activities. However, there are limits to how much speed can be gained by adding staff. Simply doubling the workforce does not necessarily halve the completion time. The effectiveness of adding resources depends on whether tasks can be divided into independent parts with minimal communication required between workers. In reality, most projects require coordination and communication among team members, so adding more workers increases these requirements. Managing a larger team takes more time, and there is also a delay in training new members and getting them up to speed. Frederick Brooks's observation, known as Brooks's law, states that adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. However, if new staff is added early enough, there is sufficient time to make up for lost ground once they are fully assimilated. 2. Outsourcing project work. Another method is to subcontract specific activities to external parties. Subcontractors may possess superior technology or expertise that can accelerate the completion of those activities. For example, hiring a consulting firm specializing in a particular programming language can significantly reduce the time required compared to using internal resources. Subcontracting also frees up internal resources that can be allocated to critical activities, further shortening the project duration. 3. Scheduling over time. Rather than adding more people, managers can schedule overtime for existing team members. By working additional hours per week, the team can accomplish more within the same time frame. Scheduling overtime avoids the coordination and communication costs associated with adding new team members. However, there are drawbacks to sustained overtime, such as increased labor costs for hourly workers and intangible costs like burnout and turnover. Extended overtime can also lead to decreased productivity due to fatigue. 4. Establishing a core project team. Creating a dedicated core team for the project can expedite its completion. By assigning professionals full-time to the project and avoiding multitasking, the team can focus solely on the project's requirements. This dedicated focus fosters a shared goal and enhances teamwork, which contributes to faster project completion. 5. Doing it twice. In some cases, when time is limited, a temporary or quick and dirty solution can be implemented first, followed by a more thorough and correct solution later. This approach allows for meeting deadlines while acknowledging that additional costs may be incurred by redoing the work. It is often seen in software development, where initial versions are released with limited features and subsequent updates address bugs and add new functionalities. Second option. When resources are constrained and the project manager needs to accelerate project completion, there are still some options available. 1. Improve the efficiency of the project team. The project team can focus on enhancing productivity by implementing more efficient work methods, improving planning and organization, and eliminating barriers to productivity such as excessive bureaucracy and red tape. By streamlining processes and optimizing workflow, the team can accomplish more with the available resources. 2. Fast tracking. This approach involves rearranging the project network logic to allow critical activities to be performed in parallel rather than sequentially, by identifying dependencies that can be modified from finish to start to start to start relationships. Activities can overlap and progress concurrently. Fast tracking requires close coordination and communication among team members and carries some risks, such as potential rework due to late design changes. 3. Use critical chain management, CCPM. Critical chain project management is a methodology designed to expedite project completion. While it may be challenging to implement CCPM in the middle of a project, it can yield significant time savings when applied from the beginning. CCPM involves identifying and managing critical resources and focusing on completing tasks within the critical chain to reduce overall project duration. Adopting CCPM may require training and a shift in management perspective. 4. Reduce project scope. One common response to unattainable deadlines is to reduce the project scope. This involves reassessing the project's true requirements and distinguishing between essential and non-essential features. By discussing the situation with the customer or project sponsors and prioritizing essential elements, it may be possible to meet the deadline with a scaled-down version of the project. However, reducing scope should be carefully considered to avoid diminishing the project's value. 5. Compromise quality as a last resort. While not recommended, compromising quality is an option to save time. However, sacrificing quality can have negative consequences and is generally not acceptable. It is important to prioritize quality and ensure that compromising it does not undermine the overall success of the project. It is important to complete projects quickly and address the challenge project managers face in balancing time reduction with associated costs. To address this, a method is proposed for determining the costs of shortening project time and comparing them with the benefits of early completion. This involves collecting direct and indirect costs related to different project durations, focusing on critical activities that can be optimized. By evaluating these costs against the benefits, managers can decide whether accelerating project completion is worthwhile. This systematic approach enables informed decision-making and a comprehensive evaluation of trade-offs in project time reduction. This figure illustrates the relationship between project duration and costs, providing insights into both direct and indirect costs. Total costs, comprising direct and indirect costs, are plotted against different project durations. Indirect costs, which persist throughout the project's lifespan, decrease as project duration decreases. Direct costs, however, exhibit an escalating trend as project duration is shortened from its originally planned duration. This graph enables managers to swiftly assess alternatives such as meeting time to market deadlines. In project management, indirect costs and direct costs represent two fundamental types of expenses associated with a project. 1. Indirect costs. Indirect costs are overhead expenses not directly tied to a specific work package or activity. They include items such as supervision, administration, consultants, and interest. These costs are essential for overall project functioning, but aren't directly attributable to any particular task. Indirect costs vary with the project duration, meaning they fluctuate as the project progresses. For instance, reducing the project duration would typically result in decreased indirect costs. For example, if daily supervision, administration, and consultant costs amount to $2,000, shortening the project by a day would save $2,000. If indirect costs make up a significant portion of total project expenses, reducing project duration can yield substantial savings, provided the freed-up resources can be utilized elsewhere. 2. Direct costs. Direct costs are expenses directly associated with specific work packages or activities. They include labor, materials, equipment, and sometimes subcontractors. These costs are directly allocated to the work packages they pertain to. Ideally, direct costs reflect normal costs, representing efficient methods for completing work within a standard time frame. However, when project durations are imposed or shortened, direct costs may increase. Costs based on imposed durations exceed those calculated from ideal normal times for activities. Decreasing activity duration generally raises its direct costs. The sum of all work package or activity costs constitutes the total direct project costs. The construction of a project cost duration graph involves three major steps: finding total direct costs for selected project durations. This step focuses on determining the overall direct costs associated with specific project durations. It requires identifying critical activities that can be shortened to reduce the project duration. By considering the normal and crash times and costs of these activities, the total direct costs for each duration can be calculated. Finding total indirect costs for selected project durations. In this step, the focus shifts to determining the total indirect costs for the same selected project durations. Indirect costs typically include expenses such as supervision, administration, consultants, and interest. These costs are often incurred on a daily basis, so calculating the total indirect costs involves multiplying the daily rate by the number of days in each duration. Summing direct and indirect costs for the selected durations. The final step involves adding together the total direct costs and total indirect costs for each selected project duration. This allows for the computation of the total project costs associated with each duration. The most challenging aspect of constructing a cost duration graph is determining the total direct costs for specific project durations within a relevant range. This task involves making decisions on which activities to shorten and how much to shorten them. The goal is to identify critical activities that can be shortened with the least increase in cost per unit of time. To make these decisions, project managers need to consider the normal and crash times and the associated costs for each activity. The normal time for an activity represents the duration required to complete the activity using low-cost, efficient methods under normal conditions. On the other hand, the crash time represents the shortest realistic duration in which the activity can be completed. The crash cost is the direct cost associated with completing the activity in its crash time. These values are obtained from the individuals who are most familiar with carrying out the activity. A cost duration graph, like the one shown in this figure, illustrates the relationship between the duration and cost of an activity. In this graph, the normal time is represented by a point on the graph with a specific cost, and the crash time is represented by another point with a corresponding cost. The line connecting these 2 points represents the slope, which assumes a constant cost per unit of time when reducing the activity duration. The assumptions underlying the use of this graph include linearity of the cost-time relationship, the efficiency of normal time, the limit of crash time reduction, and the representation of cost per unit of time by the slope. Determining the slope of each activity allows project managers to compare the cost implications of shortening different critical activities. A less steep slope indicates a lower cost to shorten the duration by one time unit, while a steeper slope indicates a higher cost. By calculating the slope for each activity, managers can compare them and identify which activities to shorten in order to minimize the total direct cost. To find the total direct cost for each specific compressed project duration, the process involves examining the preliminary project schedule or an ongoing one and identifying critical activities that can be candidates for reduction. The total direct cost is then determined for each compressed project duration. This is an example. This figure provides information about the normal and crash times, costs, computed slope and time reduction limit for each activity, as well as the total direct cost and the project network duration of 25 time units. The total direct cost for the 25 period duration is stated as $450. This cost serves as a reference point to start the process of shortening the critical paths and determining the total direct costs for durations less than 25 time units. To calculate the maximum time reduction for an activity, we simply find the difference between its normal time and crash time. For example, activity D has a normal time of 11 time units and a crash time of 7 time units, which gives a maximum time reduction of 4 time units. To compute the positive slope for activity D, we can use the formula positive slope equal crash cost, normal cost, slash normal time, crash time. In this case, the crash cost is $150, the normal cost is $50, the normal time is 11 time units, and the crash time is 7 time units. Plugging these values into the formula, we get positive slope for activity D equal $150, $50, slash 11 minus 7 equal $25. Therefore, the positive slope for activity D is $25. This diagram shows that the critical path consists of activities A, D, F, and G. Activity A is circled because it is the least cost candidate for reduction, with a slope of $20, which is lower than the slopes of activities D and F, $25 and $30 respectively. By reducing activity A by one time unit, the project duration is shortened to 24 time units, but the total direct costs increase to $470, $450 plus $20 equal $470. Figure B illustrates these changes, with the duration of activity A reduced to 2 time units and an X indicating that it cannot be further reduced. Next, activity D is circled because it costs the least, $25, to shorten the project to 23 time units. The comparison is made with activity F, which likely has a higher cost for reduction. The total direct cost for a project duration of 23 time units is stated as $495. Figure A shows that the project network now has two critical paths, AC, FG, and AD, FG. Further reducing the project to 22 time units requires the reduction of activity F, which is circled. Figure B reflects this change, and the total direct cost for 22 time units is $525. This reduction introduces a third critical path, A, B, E, G, where all activities are critical. To achieve a project duration of 21 time units, the least cost method involves the combination of circled activities C, D, and D costing $30, $25, and $30, respectively. This combination increases the total direct costs to $610. This figure depicts the results of these changes. Although there are still activities that can be reduced, those without an X next to their time, none of them, or any combination, will result in a further reduction in the project duration. After determining the total direct costs for different project durations, the next step is to collect the indirect costs for the same durations. These costs, typically a rate per day, can be obtained from the accounting department. This table presents the total direct costs, total indirect costs, and total project costs, while last figure visually represents the same costs. The table reveals that the optimum cost time duration is 22 time units and $775. It is stated that any deviation from this duration will increase project costs. The shift from 25 to 22 time units occurs because within this range, the absolute slopes of the indirect costs are greater than the slopes of the direct costs. Okay, practical considerations. You need to know that the project cost duration graph is a useful tool for comparing different alternatives or changes in terms of their cost and time implications. It highlights the importance of considering indirect costs in decision-making, which are often overlooked. This graph can be created before the project starts or during its progress. Creating the graph in the pre-project planning phase without a fixed duration is preferred as it provides a more meaningful assessment based on normal time. On the other hand, creating the graph during the project planning phase with a fixed duration is less desirable because it may not result in the lowest cost. Creating the graph after the project has started is the least desirable option, as it may exclude certain alternatives from consideration. Collecting crash times for activities can be challenging, as the definition of crash time varies and is subject to different interpretations. Estimators may feel uncomfortable providing crash times, and the accuracy of crash time and cost estimates is often rough compared to normal time and cost estimates. The linearity assumption, which assumes a linear relationship between cost and time, is generally acceptable for most projects and allows for reasonable and quick comparisons. Concerns about non-linearity or curvilinear relationships between cost and time are often not a practical concern for managers. In some cases, activities can only be crashed in an all-or-nothing manner, without the option to crash them by single time units. Additionally, factors beyond cost should be considered when deciding which activities to crash, such as risks, timing, resource availability, and the impact on the project team's morale and motivation. The decision to go for the optimum cost time depends on the level of risk and the sensitivity of the project network. Sensitive networks with multiple critical or near-critical paths require careful analysis to avoid increasing the risk of delays and higher costs. Insensitive networks with a dominant critical path offer potential for significant cost savings with minimal risk. Ultimately, the decision of whether and how to crash activities is a judgment call, taking into account various factors and the overall project goals.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe to channel.